Hey Internet, my name is Jeff and I'm a pastor, and over the last couple of weeks, most recently on Wednesday nights at the Bible study I teach, we have been talking about each of the passages in the Bible that talk about homosexuality. This is part 3 of that series, so if you haven't seen parts 1 or 2, I'm adjusting my watch so it doesn't do that every time I hit the table. So if you haven't seen parts 1 or 2 yet, make sure you go and see parts 1 and 2. This is part 3, and today we are talking about Leviticus. So get excited. First thing that I want to do is read the 2 passages in Leviticus that talk about homosexuality, and we're going to start with Leviticus chapter 18, verse 22, which says, should have had my Bible open before. Leviticus 18. There it is. Okay. Which says, "You shall not lie with a male as with a woman. It is an abomination." So that's the first verse in Leviticus that talks about homosexuality. Here's the second verse. It is Leviticus chapter 20, verse 13, and it says, "If a man lies with a male as with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall be put to death. Their blood is upon them." So these couple of verses in Leviticus are verses that people will point to and they'll say, see, it's very clear in the Bible that the Bible does condemn homosexual practice. Which it does seem pretty clear in these verses that the Bible condemns homosexual practice, but as often happens in this debate, we need to talk about what else is condemned in Leviticus. So I've put together just a short list of some things that are also condemned in Leviticus. Not including salt in offerings to God.
Eating fat, eating blood.
Failing to testify against any wrongdoing you've been told about. Touching an unclean animal. Carelessly making an oath. Letting your hair be unkempt. Drinking alcohol in holy places.
Eating or touching an animal which doesn't both chew cud and has a divided hoof. So this would include camels, rabbits, or pigs. Eating or touching the carcass of any seafood without fins or scales. Shrimp, scallops. Being in an unholy assembly within 33 days after giving birth to a boy, or 66 days after giving birth to a girl.
Having sex with a woman during her period.
Reaping to the very edge of a field. Stealing, lying, holding back wages of an employee overnight. Spreading gossip. Holding a grudge. Mixing fabrics in clothing. Crossbreeding animals. Planting different seeds in the same field, eating fruit from a tree within 4 years of planting it, practicing divination or seeking omens, trimming your beard, cutting your hair at the sides, getting tattoos, mistreating foreigners, working on
Saturday, and selling land. These are all things that are banned in Leviticus. So often in this debate, you'll hear people say, oh, you're just cherry picking different parts of the Bible that you want to believe, and you're embracing some verses and throwing out other verses. Well, as I said in our first video, we kind of all do that, and I think that just looking at Leviticus shows how guilty all of us are of doing this. Because if we're going to really focus on the 2 verses that talk about homosexuality, then we kind of need to look at all of these other ones. And I think that we're pretty guilty pretty quickly in this list. In fact, I just got back from getting a haircut, so I think that I broke 3 of these just by going to get my haircut today. By the way, do you like it? Shout out to Liz. I think she did a good job. So aside from considering all of the other verses in Leviticus and all of the other rules that we break quite regularly in Leviticus, I think that we also need to consider what exactly this word abomination means. Now, quick thing about the Hebrew language, which is the language that Leviticus is written in, the Hebrew language tends to have a broad lexical range, and what that means is that one word can mean a lot of different things. Contrast this with a language like Ancient Greek, which is what the New Testament is written in. Some of you may already be familiar with the fact that there are 3 different Greek words that are translated to our English word life in the New Testament, and 4 words that are translated into our English word love in the New Testament. So Greek has a very narrow lexical range. Hebrew's the opposite, so one word can mean a lot of different things. And this is true of this word abomination. It could mean abomination, which sounds pretty heavy. I mean, do we ever even use that word abomination in our regular speaking? I mean, I don't even know the last time that I used the word abomination outside of talking about these passages in Leviticus. But it sounds pretty heavy. But this word abomination, the same Hebrew word can also mean something like taboo, which is not as heavy as abomination. So for the sake of illustration, the other night when we were talking about this text, I asked the question, what would be an abomination on Thanksgiving? And people said things like burning the turkey or not carving the turkey right. I didn't think that these things were that abominable. My mind was going to things like accidentally cutting off your hand while you're carving the turkey. These things would be abominable. They would be abominations. But something like maybe not taking your shoes off at the door of a house where people normally take their shoes off, that would be something that's more like a taboo. Sorry about that. I got a phone call, so that's why you're looking at me from a different angle now, because I had to answer the phone that I'm recording on right now. Anyway, this word can mean abomination, like abomination, or it could just mean something like taboo. It could be something that's softer. Another thing that we need to talk about is the fact that apparently Leviticus says that homosexual practice is a capital offense. A capital offense, which is something that we really need to reconcile because, first of all, really, it's a capital offense, which, by the way, I recognize that it still is in some parts of the world, which is pretty terrible. But we also need to look at what else the Bible says is a capital offense. So just a couple of examples. In Exodus chapter 35, verse 2, apparently working on the Sabbath is a capital offense. I don't have the citation right in front of me, but now that I'm thinking about it, disobeying your parents is a capital offense. If you look at Ezekiel chapter 18, verse 13, charging interest on loans is a capital offense. So as I've been saying for 3 videos now, you can disagree with me. That is totally fine. I totally get it if you disagree with me. There are a lot of different ways to interpret these texts. But if you're going to interpret these texts to say that they condemn homosexuality, we've got a lot of explaining to do if we're going to do that. For example, we have to explain why Leviticus only condemns male same-sex practice. Because, again, you may have noticed that the verse says, if a man lies with a male as with a woman, then that's an abomination. But it doesn't say anything about women lying with women, so, we've got some explaining to do there. We also need to address why this is a Levitical law that we pay attention to while we may completely ignore some other ones. Even if we just say, okay, fine, you're right, I don't follow all of the Levitical laws, but I do think the sex laws are still important, then we also need to consider why some of them are no longer taboo, or why some of even the sex laws aren't really that important anymore. Like, for example, having sex with a woman while she's menstruating. I think that, once again, what this text is probably about is not necessarily about condemning 2 people who are in a loving, consenting, committed relationship who also happen to be the same sex. I don't think this is what's being condemned. Instead, I think it might be something different. Something like the domination and humiliation that a same-sex act meant in the ancient world. I think that that's probably more what it's condemning. I think it's more condemning, dominating, and humiliating people than it is about 2 consenting people having sex together. All right, everybody, so that is Leviticus. I hope you enjoyed it. Of course you enjoyed it. Who doesn't like spending an afternoon looking at Levitical law? If you liked this, click like and subscribe. If you didn't like this, click like and subscribe anyway. Why not? Thank you. Next week, we're going to be talking about the book of Romans, specifically Romans chapter 1, and what Paul has to say about homosexuality. In the meantime, grace and peace.